And now, a very special guest. Given the challenges facing our democracy, we are indeed fortunate that the state's chief election officer was also a teacher of AP courses in U.S. history and civics. Amen. Who needs, right? Let's bring that back. His ongoing commitment to voter education and access is widely known and very much appreciated. So we are honored to have Secretary of State Gregg Amore join us today.
It's an honor to be here today with a nice showing on a beautiful fall Sunday. When I was pulling in, I saw a bumper sticker on the back of a car that said Bruce. It was a Springsteen bumper sticker. And so whoever that is, well done. And I couldn't help think of the video that I just saw over the last few days of Bruce Springsteen talking about an endorsement for Harris Walls in such a monumental way that bridges all divides, that talks about what America is. If you have not seen his endorsement, it's more of a love letter to America and what America should and can be. And so well done to the Bruce Springsteen fan out in the parking lot. So I'd like to speak to you kind of from a 30,000 foot level, and anytime I get to talk about democracy, the teacher in me comes out. And so I'll take a few questions at the conclusion of my remarks, and I'll talk about what the Department of State is doing to address what I am about to speak to you in regard to the protection of our democracy. And it is a time of great peril. For democracies around the world, not just here in the United States, there are only 35 liberal democracies in the world as we speak. And when we talk about liberal democracies, we're talking about a system of checks and balances, a system where the minority point of view has a say and protections, as in the Bill of Rights. We're talking about an independent judiciary. We're talking about free and fair elections, where when the election is decided, both parties shake hands and move on, accepting the results of that election. That number 35, just 9 years ago, was 44. And so we are in a universal challenge around maintaining democracy. And whenever I think about this for more than a few minutes, I am reminded of Abraham Lincoln. And so I'm going to start with Abraham Lincoln because he's always a good place to start. Abraham Lincoln was only 28 years old, a member of the Illinois House of Representatives, a Whig. The Republican Party had not yet been formed. When he was asked to give a speech at the Lyceum, the Young Men's Lyceum of Springfield. It is now known as the Lyceum Address. But it was not a famous Lincoln speech. It has become a famous Lincoln speech, often confused with a speech during the Civil War, but nonetheless, it has stood the test of time. Lincoln was asked to speak about the perils facing the nation as the founding fathers were fading away and the age of Jacksonian democracy was dawning. And that age of Jacksonian democracy was marked by a few different things. It was marked by a populism that Lincoln believed to be dangerous. It was marked by ambitious politicians who were not, in Lincoln's view, virtuous. And it was marked by an effort to intimidate and force one's political will upon the nation. In fact, Lincoln refers to this as mobocracy. And he is particularly concerned in January of 1838 when he gives this speech because just recently Elijah Lovejoy, the great abolitionist, had been murdered. And Lincoln was incredibly concerned that as the founding fathers left the stage, that what they left behind in regard to our political institutions was going to be left behind with them. And so our political institutions and the survival of our political institutions was the theme that Lincoln spoke of. I'm going to quote the most famous passage of this speech. I hope you've heard it, but many people have never heard it. He said in regard to this danger of the mobocracy, of political violence, of those not adhering to the rule of law. He said, "At what point shall we expect the approach of danger? By what means shall we fortify against it? Shall we expect some transatlantic military giant to step the ocean and crush us at a blow? Never. all the armies of Europe, Asia, and Africa combined, with all the treasure of the earth in their military chest, with a Bonaparte for commander, could not by force take a drink from the Ohio or make a track on the Blue Ridge in a trial of 1,000 years. At what point, then, is the approach of danger to be expected? I answer, if it ever reach us, it must spring up amongst us. It cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we must ourselves be its author and finisher. As a nation of free men, we must live through all time or die by suicide. This is in direct response to the lack of rule of law, the lack of appreciation for the political institutions that the Founding Fathers had established, with full knowledge that there was always going to be protest, healthy protest. But the idea of abandoning the rule of law in place of ambition bothered Lincoln so much that this address was solely focused on that. He said, and history tells us, "New reapers will always arise, and they, too, will seek a field. It is to deny what the history of the world tells us is true, to suppose that men of ambition and talents will not continue to spring up amongst us. And when they do, they will as naturally seek the gratification of their ruling passion as others have done before them. It is unreasonable then to expect that some man possessed of the loftiest genius and talents, coupled with ambition sufficient to push it to the utmost stretch, will at some time spring among us. And when such one does, it will require the people to be united with each other, attached to the government and laws, and generally intelligent to successfully frustrate his designs." If that is not a perfect description of what we face today, then I have never heard or read one. And this is a 28-year-old Abraham Lincoln,
Wow.
who at the time no one knew except for the locals in Springfield. So the best part about Lincoln is he doesn't just point out a problem, he offers a solution. And the reason I am so attached to this speech, and my students have been attached to that speech for 30 years, is because his solution is civic education. His solution is embracing all of our founding documents' best principles. He talked about a civic religion in the nation, where the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights was talked about at the kitchen table, after church, in schools, even at dinner, God forbid. People are talking about the founding principles at dinner and not about the nonsense that we tend to talk about today. He said we needed to embrace those founding principles found in the Declaration of Independence. The idea of the consent of the governed, the idea that we all have the right to pursue happiness, the idea of liberty. He said this has to become a national religion. This has to be what we talk about all the time because it is the only thing that unites us. It is the only thing that unites us. So I know that I saw Eileen passing out our constitutions. These pocket constitutions have been given to thousands of students around the state since I took office. We have been to nearly 70 high schools talking about voting rights, the history of voting rights in the United States, and why it's important to vote. I bring up Lincoln all the time. I hand them these constitutions, which not only have the Constitution, but have the Declaration of Independence, have the Act of Renunciation, Rhode Island's Declaration of Independence, and we talk about having those students look at this as the connector, as the thing that makes us all Americans. By the way, it is a living, breathing document. It can be changed, and we point that out. But the thing that binds us together are those principles that Abraham Lincoln spoke of. The things that bind us together are beyond personality and ambition. The things that make us Americans are embedded in those founding documents. We have not always lived up to those documents, clearly. The story of the nation is a story of fits and starts, marching toward a perfect union and then every once in a while taking a big leap backwards, but then marching again. That is something that we should all talk about all the time. Instead, we are caught up in the petty. We are caught up in ad hominem attacks. We are caught up in an age where scoring a political point in an argument is more important than making a case. So what have we done? We have established the Rhode Island Civic Leadership Program, where we bring in students from Now we're up to 53 high schools, over 100 students across the state from every school, private, public, parochial, charter. They come together once a month to learn how government works, to talk about the founding principles, to talk about what brings us together as a nation. But they are given tools by our staff, and they're exposed to many of the politicians in the state, the media personalities in the state, members of the judiciary, nonprofit leaders, elections officials. They are given this unbelievable access, but more importantly, a young man from Central Falls sits next to a young woman from Westerly. And the only time they would ever interact with each other is perhaps at an athletic contest. And we have a young man from Moses Brown sitting next to a young woman from East Providence. And they are now talking to one another and sharing their point of view and their backgrounds and what they think. And then we bring out the toolkit. And the toolkit is how to engage with someone who you disagree with. How you have a conversation, a civil conversation with someone that you are adamantly opposed to in regard to their political point of view. And that is the theme that runs through the program from the start, and it just started in September. Once a month, they come to the State House. They sit down and they hear from some speakers, and then they workshop around the issue of the day. And then, in April, they come together for a 3-day summit at the Marriott Hotel. They stay 2 nights. They spend a day in the judiciary. They have lunch with the judges. They spend a day on the House floor. They debate a bill. They debated the assault weapons bill this time around. It was a passionate debate. It was a fact-based debate. There wasn't a single ad hominem attack. There were no point-scoring efforts. It was laying out the argument on both sides. Now, we forced them to take a position they may not have had. We forced them to look at the other side of the argument and make that case, and then we allowed them to vote their conscience. And when they voted their conscience, you can imagine, they voted overwhelmingly to ban assault weapons in the state of Rhode Island. And these are students from the reddest of the Rhode Island districts, I like to say the folks in the woods, to the bluest of Rhode Island districts, the folks in the cities. And it was universal. It wasn't unanimous, but it was universal consent in regard to a legislative victory. But to hear these young people argue this case on the floor after preparing for this debate through committee, through efforts prior to the summit, was a fascinating exercise. Now this looks and is somewhat like the national effort called Close Up, except these students are really in. They are absolutely in the functioning of government. They are working with people who are working in government, and they are being shown how to interact with their elected officials, shown how to make a case, shown how to create a petition, shown how to argue on behalf of a point of view. We believe we are creating the next generation of Rhode Island leaders, maybe political leaders, maybe nonprofit leaders, maybe folks who are policy people, but this is an attempt to do what Abraham Lincoln asked us to do in 1838. It's an attempt to bring students together around their Americanness. Now, we encourage them to be passionate about their values. We encourage them to be passionate when they are arguing a case. But we have, at least to this point, successfully given them the tools to do so in a respectful way, so that they can see the humanity in one another, so that they can make a connection with one another. It is an incredibly powerful thing to see these young people in this environment who tell us we can't have Thanksgiving dinner without there being an argument. We can't go to a wake or a funeral without there being pushback from one family member against the other. They tell us that. And so they are encouraged to know that they are in a room with students from all over the state, and that is not happening. And so we are committed to continue to go to high schools around the state and teach about the history of voting rights in America and why it is so important. Outside my office door is a banner. It's John Lewis hugging Barack Obama, and it has the great John Lewis quote that says, "Democracy is not a state, it is an act. And it is not promised, it must be earned." And so that is what we're telling these students when we reach them. And by the way, we're talking to more than students. We have been to senior centers to give this message. We have been around the state in our elections information tour, and we started our elections information tour in the woods, where the skeptics are out and in abundance. And Saturday mornings, we spoke to full auditoriums of people who had questions about elections. And we answered every question. There was no time limit on the town hall. We answered every single question. Sometimes the folks in the audience didn't appreciate the answers or didn't believe the answers. Some are convinced that we use Dominion voting machines here in Rhode Island. We have never used Dominion voting machines. And even if we did, they would be fine. They were fine. Proof of the $800 million payout that Fox News made to Dominion voting. But the point is, we wanted to put a human face. Our entire elections team went to these town hall meetings. We want to put a human face to the process, to the political institutions that Abraham Lincoln spoke of. It's incredibly important that we talk to one another, not at one another. It's incredibly important that we listen even when we are disgusted with what is coming out of the person talking to us. We have to listen. We have to be respectful. We can walk away, for sure. We can walk away for sure. But there has to be a time and place where we come back together. I am old enough to remember when the nightly news, the national nightly news, would lead off with the Kennedy Center Profile and Courage Award, the JFK Library rather, Profiles and Courage Award. And basically the Profiles and Courage Award was given to someone who risked their political safety to do the virtuous thing, to do the right thing. And that was the lead on the nightly news whenever the JFK Library would present these awards to people like Liz Cheney, who just took all of her political opinions and set them aside for the benefit of the democracy as a whole. She is a Profile and Courage Award winner, for sure. I don't agree with anything Liz Cheney agrees. I don't agree with anything Liz Cheney believes in politically, but I certainly agree with her that we're at the precipice of a liberal democracy beginning to fail. By the way, the University of Rhode Island is running a great series of lectures on the backsliding of democracy and what can be done to stop that. It's fascinating. So I was in Philadelphia, and I'm going to wrap it up here and then take some questions. I was in Philadelphia 2 weeks ago because I'm the chair of the America 250 Rhode Island version. So it's the celebration of the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the semi-quincentennial. That's not a word, but that's what they call this, the semi-quincentennial. And it's a commemoration, not necessarily a celebration, around the Declaration of Independence and the American Revolution. And we are trying to make the stars of our celebration, commemoration, the Rhode Island 1st Regiment. The 1st Rhode Island Regiment, which was the first integrated regiment in the history of the American military. It was black soldiers, indigenous soldiers, white soldiers who fought and performed with distinction. They are being displayed at the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia. When you walk in the door, there is the 1st Rhode Island. It made me proud. I took a photograph with it. We're going to bring that portrait here so that Rhode Islanders can appreciate that history. The 250 Commission has produced a video talking about Rhode Island's history. You'll see more and more of it as we get closer to 2026, but it concludes with a video image of the Cape Verdean Veterans Memorial. So it starts with the 1st Rhode Island and it finishes with the Rhode Island Cape Verdean Veterans Memorial, trying to tie those two things in together, the idea of service and sacrifice and the things that make us American. And so this is our effort. And I was on South 3rd Street where Benjamin Franklin was approached by a woman who said, "Dr. Franklin, what do we have? A republic or a monarchy?" And he said, "A republic if you can keep it." And we have kept it for 248 years. We have kept it through world wars and great depressions. We have kept it through disputed elections that were much, much closer than the past presidential election. Much, much closer than 2020. 1876 was much closer. 1960 was much closer. 2000 was much closer. And in each case, Samuel Tilden, Richard Nixon, Al Gore did what our founding documents require us to do. Accept the result of an election. By the way, that used to be one of the perfect examples of American exceptionalism. Accepting the result of an election, shaking the hand of your opponent, and then fighting the fight another day. On the battlefield of ideas. on the battlefield of ideas. And that is what we're trying to impart upon the students of Rhode Island with the Rhode Island Civic Leadership Program. That's what I'm trying to do with all of my efforts around elections, because we can talk about legislation, we can talk about same-day voter registration, which I am pushing for. There's no reason that Rhode Island shouldn't have same-day voter registration. New Hampshire can do it, as the Deputy Secretary of State, Rob Rocco, says, if New Hampshire can do it, we can do it, and we should have that. But you know what? None of this matters if the democracy fails. None of this matters if we can't come together at least around the founding principles. If we can't come together about what makes us Americans. And so that's my promise to Rhode Islanders. It was my promise in my inaugural address where I said we need to look at each other not as political opponents, not as enemies, but fellow Americans who may disagree. And then we can fight the fights as hard and as passionately as we should. But it has to be done in the context of what Abraham Lincoln called our political institutions and the preservation of such. And so I appreciate the opportunity to address you today, and I'd be happy to take questions on any of this, but also on the process of elections, because that's what we're doing. We are in the heat of it right now. The Board of Elections has basically taken over the process at this point, except for the request of absentee ballots, but we're prepared, we're ready to go, and Rhode Island will be a state that provides a fair and secure election and access beyond just about any state. Once we get same-day voter registration, we will be the shining star of voter access. Okay, yes?
So I understand your disagreement with Liz Cheney on everything. Do you disagree with her on who she's supporting for president?
No. Listen, I think if you're a lowercase d Democrat, I don't think you have a choice.
I don't think you have a choice.
And it's not about issues. We have survived bad policy in this country, right? We've survived it time and time again. It is difficult to survive a person who is hell-bent on serving himself and not the nation, and who disregards the rule of law and the Constitution. Yes, sir.
You talk about the difference between the woods living and the city living. What is it about those? What do you think it causes that kind of a split, just because of what kind of circumstances you live in?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that in Rhode Island it's odd to me, because some of those places, those red places that are in the woods, were not so long ago Democratic strongholds, and they have slowly but surely over the course of time moved to the right. I talk about this, and we talk about this with our students as well. I think so many Americans are now in an echo chamber, and they are never taking the opportunity or the initiative to seek information outside of that echo chamber. And that has become more and more of a problem with social media. You're only hearing and seeing what you want to hear and see. And then, in our communities, we talk to one another, but it's almost a revolving discussion around, how about the FEMA dollars not going to the people that deserve them, but they're going to undocumented, of course they wouldn't use the term undocumented, but they're going to the migrants. So that's an echo chamber issue. That's why we went to Burrillville and Exeter and all of the places where I did not win, and sat down and talked to people for 2.5 hours about the process. Because that's why I go on WPRO whenever they ask me. Those folks who are listening to WPRO on a daily basis are not my voters. But it's important that they hear from me about this process, because that might be the only time they hear how the mail ballot process works. And so I think it's a serious problem, because we're in those silos. And so I think that's more a reflection of the nation rather than Rhode Island, although obviously there are demographic issues, there are Second Amendment belief issues, there are all those that revolve around that. I think I saw somebody's hand back there. Yes.
Thank you, Secretary Amore. I'm Roxanne Stern from Riverside, and
God's country.
Every time that we go to vote at a polling place, what we have to do is just connect the arrows with a felt tip pen. And that is a wonderful way and I think a rather permanent and firm way to declare one's choice. And then we just put it in the machine and it's counted. And I'm wondering how many other states and how many other places in our country have that method of marking the ballot. And I'm wondering why more states aren't doing that.
So-
we
so-
have the hanging Chad problem and so forth. Thank you.
It's a good question, thank you. And John Marion is going to speak after me, and he might have some absolute data on this. But most states are using that method. Now we bubble in a circle. Most states are using paper ballots. The vast majority of states are using paper ballots. There are some, and that's the interesting part about elections, is elections are not necessarily run state by state, right? Every county in Texas theoretically could be running an election differently with different machines. And a different process, to open mail ballots, et cetera. So it's an incredibly decentralized system, which proves that you can't manipulate a national election. It's so decentralized that this idea that a national election is being manipulated, even when every down ballot race proves the opposite, where Republicans outperformed the president on those ballots, the decentralization of the system is a good thing. So there are a few places that use electronic voting machines. We in Rhode Island have our receipts. Most states have their receipts, and we do a fantastic audit. I think it's the gold standard of audits, where post-election, folks, and John Marion is always there at this process. This is the risk-limiting audit, and folks come together. A particular precinct and a race is picked, and those ballots are hand-counted and then matched up against the machine. And we've been doing this since 2017, and those results are simpatico. They are connected. That's the greatest proof that the machines are working and that the process is working. We could go into mail ballots a little bit deeper, but I think that's going to be the argument against what we hear around disinformation and misinformation. And by the way, the state of Georgia did it to the umpteenth degree. And to your point, after the election of 2000, the Help America Vote Act was passed, and lots of money flooded into the states to help them have better voting processes. So better machines, better poll pads, better record keeping. And that has happened across the board. You know, when I'm with my colleagues from around the nation, Democrats and Republicans, they are defending their elections process in their state. Not in my state, it's happening in Illinois. Not in my state, it's almost like public education. Right? Oh, public education is in trouble, but I love my school and I love my teacher. It's the exact same argument, and so that's a good question. I think I have time for one more. Yes.
When you go around the state and talk to lots of people, how challenging is it, to go back to your earlier point, how challenging is it for you to overcome disinformation? When you're people are arguing and they have, propaganda.
Yeah.
How tough is it to get over that, to start to agree on facts or convince people that we can disagree, but there is a certain level ground?
Yeah, I'm a kill them with kindness person. So I just keep making the case. And I also believe that human beings are reflective. And so they may push back in that moment, but there's probably going to be a point on the ride home or at night over dinner where they start thinking about that. They still may abandon what they heard and say, oh, that's nonsense, I'm going to go with Rudy Giuliani instead. But I think there are people in the room that are hearing this information for the first time who then will share that with family members, will share that with neighbors, will take one piece of the process and say, you know what, the Secretary of State said that every mail ballot envelope has a barcode attached to that voter's name. So you can't be filling somebody else's ballot. The Secretary of State said that when the mail ballot applications went out in 2020, when they were undeliverable, they came back and those people were put on an inactive list and then removed from that list after 2 consecutive elections. So we have the cleanest voter rolls in the history of Rhode Island. We also are accessible. That's the perfect combination. So I just try to keep making the case, and I know for sure some people are taking that message home and we're breaking through. And for the other folks, it's hard to think that anybody was walking around in 1982, talking about how proud they were in their vote for Richard Nixon. So I'm hopeful that there won't be anybody walking around 10 years from now who are proud of any of this. And I think the only thing we can do is keep sharing the facts and keep being out. We can't dismiss, if you say, oh, you believe in this, this, and this, you're a conspiracy theorist, you're an idiot, the conversation's over. So you just have the conversation. You painstakingly go through the process and force these folks to listen, ask questions, and hopefully some of it breaks through. But I try not to get discouraged. I was 27 years in a high school. Tim Wallace says cafeteria duty does that. It gives you patience. That's a fact. We should have more history teachers in office. One more, yes.
When you were talking about the getting out the information to people as a debate, type of thing, looking at the facts, it's just something for you to think about into your students. I've been in a Walmart, okay, and people, I don't know, do I have something plastered all over me or what? But people will come up to me and say, say something to me. Well, what do you think about, this? Or, isn't it was Biden at the time? Isn't Biden a horrible person? And stuff. And you don't know what to say because you don't want to start an argument or conversation that big in Walmart. Okay, but your students need to know if somebody does that.
So we have a whole process.
What did they do? Because I did not know. I started trying to be very nice to these people, but I was in CVS, and one of the people that worked there came up to me and started saying something negative.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, do I say something? Do I just walk away?
I mean,
what do you do?
You can probably read the person, and if there are sometimes you say, okay, this is not going to happen. But what we teach the students to do is create an effort where you can find something in common, right? A compliment to start. What I usually do in that situation, by the way, my wife has that same aura around her. People go. I say, the greatest part of America is that you have the ability to express that. That's the beauty of this country. Now, I have the ability to express the exact opposite. And I will tell you that I think Joe Biden's a decent man. Like any other president, he's made mistakes, like the president before him. In my view, he stands for the democratic principles that this nation was founded upon. And then you leave them. And that's the work we try to give the students. First of all, make a human connection, and then kill them with kindness. I believe that's it. I don't want to cause a delay in this whole process. I'll be here for a while, though. Thank you very much.